From hunting lodge to prestigious palace, Le Château de Versailles. The Palace of Versailles did not begin as a palace at all. Over a time period lasting longer than 50 years, the building that was once a seasonal hunting lodge underwent upgrades to fulfill a name later placed on it as Europe's largest chateau. We will learn as the palace is passed down from one generation to the next, the construction the chateau proceeded with to become the phenomenal structure representing French Baroque style of architecture it is today. The French Revolution occurred right in the middle of the renovation of the palace, but only seemed to destroy the preciousness of time, because the palace itself remained preserved. King Louis XIII first had a prestigious hunting lodge built in Versailles, France. This was the very lodge that King Louis XIV later renovated into the palace we know today, the symbol of royal absolutism and embodiment of classical French art. Louis the Great designed the palace to be built in stone and brick, to give the chateau its strong and beautiful style. This major building embarkment lasted well over 50 years after King Louis XIV inherited it from his father. Nearly half of France's annual GNP during the transformation from the lodge, a palace suited for himself, went to the improvements of the chateau during his 72-year reign. He began building slowly, renovating just the middle stretch of the Grand Facade, where he designed two symmetrical grand apartments for the king and queen. His main focus for upgrading the palace was so he could move his government and court closer to manage them. Close to 10,000 bodies were moving about the palace after the king designed expansions for his family, court, and staple staff. Around 1700, Versailles was the cultural heartbeat for this palace. The palace hosted thousands of nobles, each with an entourage. This is where people would gather for games and parties. Although the palace began as a country escape, the chateau soon became as busy as Paris itself. In result of this, the king built a smaller place deep in his backyard. This was his personal residence from the main palace. The Grand Trianon provided an ideal refuge away from the strict etiquette, stressful politics, and 24/7 scrutiny of official court life. King Louis XIV was a Renaissance man. He was symbolized by Apollo, the Greek god of the sun. He also called himself a sun king because he gave light and warmth to all that he touched. He also called himself Versailles celebrated man rather than God by elevating Louis to a near godlike status. Louis the Great was a rather hands-on king, which in turn allowed him to rule from 1643 to 1715. His famous motto in English translates to "The state, that's me." Louis XIV's political strategy was rather tricky. By distracting his nobility with games, parties, and celebrations, he was able to freely run the country. The stylistic design of the palace has always been very classical. Château de Versailles was designed to be the master temple of the god on earth, decorated with statues of Apollo, the sun, and King Louis himself. Themes were sought throughout the place underlined the divine right of France's kings and queens. When the various themes of the Versailles rooms, understood as guests, walk through them, it will be just like a stroll through French history. The Hall of Mirrors, for example, was the highlight of the palace. No one had ever seen anything like it. This was due to mirrors being a great luxury at the time. Sometime later, after creating a new program of building works, King Louis replaced the terrace overlooking the grounds, which became the court's main reception room. At the end of his reign, he moved his bedroom to the center of the palace, where he would overlook the entire place. While he would actually sleep somewhere else, the king would rise and set with the sun each day in his bedroom. Before he passed, he built a royal chapel, towering over all the buildings and at the same scale of the palace. The gardens of Versailles were mostly created during the reign of Louis XIV, XV, and XVI. The original design of the gardens was by André Le Notre and would be upgraded several times by various designers. The gardens of Versailles are a key component of the residence surrounding the chateau on three sides. They were made of plants, water features, amazing lawns, and fountains. Louis the Great controlled nature like a god. He kept his elaborate grounds planned, pruned, and decorated to show everyone that their king was in total command. Only the king could grow orange trees in the cold weather of northern France, and Louis he had 1,000. The fountains were another great way for a king to illustrate his power over nature, and were a great talent of both art and engineering. The king's fountains are powered by a rerouted river crafted by his engineers. These fountains ran for Louis whenever he liked, but in present day only run on weekends. Chateau de Versailles was laid out on an 8-mile axis, giving the effect of the backyard when Louis XV took his reign, he created the Petit Trianon for his Madame, which was later gifted to their son, Louis XVI's wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, as a gift. The Queen ordered the gardens to be replanted in an English style and built a vintage hamlet. She longed for the life of a peasant, not the realistic ones that performed tasks around her, but a fairy tale world of simple country pleasures. Queen Marie built this rustic fantasy as an actual working farm, including a dairy, a watermill, and domestic animals. She tended to her perfumed sheep and her manicured gardens in this said hamlet. The Revolution forced the family to leave the palace in 1789 for Paris. The future of the palace looked uncertain. After the Revolution, the royal railings were destroyed and the king left for good. The precious paintings and artwork were taken to the safe place, while the furniture was sold to help pay for the war. The palace itself was preserved. In 1804, when Napoleon took his reign, he renovated the Grand Trianon for residence during the summer months. Louis Philippe the 18th restored the cemetery and created the Pavillon du Fort. Almost 20 years later, Louis XVIII transformed the former residence into a museum where the king's apartment was filled with paintings and named the Galerie des Batailles. After Louis Philippe was gone, in 1875 the French Republic took possession of Versailles and renovated the Salle du Congrès to accommodate the National Assembly and Senate. Present-day Chateau de Versailles is much more complex in this day and age. It still holds many historical qualities as it did under the original reign of King Louis XIV. The official Versailles webpage explains that an estimated 5 million people visit the chateau, and 8 to 10 million people walk through the gardens every year. The palace also still serves a political function. Every year the French Parliament meets in Versailles as an agreement made within their constitution to reverse or amend France's constitution. The palace also hosts various presidential speeches each year. Lastly, the Presidential National Assembly has an official apartment at the palace, a former hunting lodge, then a royal palace with a prestigious collection, a historical museum, a living palace, and a Republican palace. That is truly the history of the Palace of Versailles.